Welcome to The Change Lead, the podcast providing leaders with the insight needed to get things done in a rapidly changing and complex world. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Connect with our community of like-minded leaders on our website, thechangelead.com. Welcome to The Change Lead with your host, Babatope Ipiyemi.
Organizations create thousands and sometimes millions of data points each day. Successful organizations are able to turn these data points into actionable insights. My guest today helps organizations on their journey to become data-informed. Marcus Glowasz works with organizations to transition to a future-proof and data-informed project management practice. Marcus is passionate about innovation and advancement of the project management practice. Today, Marcus and I will have a conversation about leading data-informed change. Hi, Marcus. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation on leading data-informed change. Hopefully, we'll have a wonderful conversation. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So to get started on the conversation on leading data-informed change, I think it would be good to ensure that we get the attention of the right people. So the right people are paying attention to this topic. Now, It's easy when you hear the phrase data-informed to think we're talking about an IT challenge, a technology challenge. If I'm honest, I've been guilty of that as well. So I think the first question I'd like to ask is, within organizations, who do you see as being responsible for driving forward a data-informed culture so we adopt data-informed behaviors?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I agree there's always, or often, let's put it this way, kind of a misunderstanding or misconception of, first of all, the term of being data informed or also data driven, and also who is actually who's driving this, right? So I mean, in a nutshell, it's everybody's responsibility in the end, right? I mean, becoming data informed is foremost a question of engagement and taking accountability, but basically by everyone who is involved. And I'm in the project management space. And so I can, all what I've researched and I'm working on is based on the project management domain. And there specifically, for too long, people are simply ignoring the value of data and information, and which ultimately leads to knowledge, right? And you see this usually in those artifacts that are produced in projects like project plans, etc., which is all knowledge, right? And you see how that's being treated nowadays, or so far, basically forever, right? So in many organizations, there's no sharing between teams or between departments. There's no proper maintaining of project data. Once a project is over, it's basically ending up in some nirvana of SharePoint or anywhere where nobody actually is finding this anymore. And so that's where obviously some data informed or some culture of being data informed comes in, right? But just mandating people to treat data in a different way that may work to some degree, but you likely will have data that is not really useful. It's not telling the truth, right? And that's where the whole cultural aspect comes in, right? So when you're saying building a data informed culture, then of course it has to do with data awareness, which needs to be present in project organizations. So understanding the value of data and also data literacy. So that means having the ability to select data and make sense out of it, right? And there you are right that it's not only limited to IT or technology teams. It's something that concerns everyone, basically anyone who is involved in decision making to start with, right? But it also has to do, or just because it has also to do with transparency. It has to do with being truthful, being authentic, and collaborate across boundaries. So it requires a mindset change that cannot be just prescribed. I always refer to, when the agile methods were introduced.
Okay.
It works, right? It's definitely something that was required. But I have seen organizations where it's just mandated, right? Like everybody needs to be agile right now. It needs to be done, right? So people just follow the instructions and just put the typical processes in place, but are not really fully engaged. They don't really understand the whole concept, don't see the overall purpose and overall goals, right? So people need to understand the purpose and the benefit behind all this, right? And how this will make everyone's work much more meaningful and rewarding, right? And that's also for a data-informed culture to see that actually happening. Otherwise, it will not work, in my opinion. So in a nutshell, culture is nothing that can be prescribed, or you can just nominate someone and please roll out this culture here, right? That's not going to work. Culture actually derives from the behaviors that, and you need to trigger those behaviors, right? Or an organization needs to initiate, and just by doing, basically starting at the very top, where you go into the decision-making process, where you actually apply this data awareness and data literacy, these kind of concepts, and where you apply this kind of understanding of data. So it must kind of start from the top, right? So if an organization wants to become really data-driven or data-informed, then, as I said, it will impact decision-making at all levels. And it needs to, wherever it starts, right, then it has some ripple effect, and people will come on board. But in the end, it's everybody's responsibility to actually be engaged and drive that further, and not just adopting something because it was mandated to do, and then just stick with the process and work that through like a routine job. That's not going to work.
Yeah, I totally agree. That makes sense. So that's quite important. Like, this is everybody's responsibility. And I like the phrase you used there. It starts at the top, because that's actually where you get the most impact. Yeah. Decision making, whether it's the top of the organization, whether it's the middle layers of the organization, even if it's frontline staff who are making calls and decisions on the day-to-day basis, from what you're saying, that's where the culture starts. So we're all responsible for driving a data-informed culture. So it shows the importance of the topic. I think it's something that more people need to become aware of. I like the term there, data awareness. There's probably not enough of it yet. We're getting there, but we need more of that awareness, and ensure that we have the right people having the right conversations around being data informed. So if we look at organizations, take a typical organization, maybe you've got a new leader in place, and they look at their culture very clearly, and they know they're not data informed. Question they'll be asking is, how do you get started? I think there's this saying, I think it's by Joe Sabar, the author and speaker. It says, you don't have to be great to start. You just have to start to become great. So those are, it's important to just get started. So how would you advise organizations who want to get started on this journey? What can they do to get started?
Yeah, that's a very question. I mean, it's a question that's often being asked, of course, and many people struggle actually to find the first steps actually to dive into this, right? But it starts actually not even with data, I think, right? But I mean, beforehand, and I will explain that further. But I mean, the typical problem first is that some people think that being data informed or data driven, I mean, it's always being used like interchangeably, right? But I see a difference there. But so that's why, just for an explanation, many say data driven, and that's where actually it started, which is misleading in my opinion, right? I mean, it's if you Google this, right, you find everywhere data driven, but not so much about data informed. So data informed is really where the people element, especially in projects, needs to come in. So you have to have some interaction with data, and data alone will not drive anything, right? People are driving this, right? And data is just informing people to take decisions. So that's one thing, right? And a typical problem is that some people think that being data informed or data-driven, if you will, is just like a tool, right? That makes lives of managers easier by just, and it provides the necessary information, and we just have to make our decisions, right? Which in most cases are then even driven by biases, and we just use data just to confirm our opinions, right? This is a common thing that unfortunately still happens, right? But data is not a tool, right? It is a resource. And what we make out of it, meaning if and how we derive insights from data, is with people who actually work with data and information and knowledge. And that's why a very first step is really to get an understanding of what one wants really to achieve. Many people, they actually just want, we want to become data-driven, right? So coming back to actually the previous example, right, with Agile, I've heard that so often, right, where people say, yeah, we're becoming agile right now, right? And then all of a sudden they said, yeah, we're agile right now. I didn't even know what that means. They didn't even know why and for what purpose, right? And eventually that failed. So if you just take on like, oh, we want to become data-driven or data-informed or whatever sounds flashy, right? Then you first need to understand really what you want to achieve. You need to have a goal, you need to have a purpose, and that's not always the same. And in projects, it feels very easy to define that, or why would we become data informed or data driven? Well, we want to improve our performance. Well, that's not sufficient, right? You have to be more specific, right? So in project management, we know, for example, that many projects are failing, right? And some teams are having significant structural problems, which then results or contributes into failure, right? Because they do not have a response mechanism in place to this increasing uncertainty and complexity. And it will not change, it will actually increase, right? Turbulences and disruption, it will be much, there will more to come, right? So we have to be prepared for this, right? But then people come, we have to become data-driven or data-informed to fix our issues, right? And that's a misconception, right? If people want to use data and think that, you bring in data to fix those more structural issues, and data will magically resolve all these issues, and this is a wrong approach, right? Projects can only become data informed if they're actually operating out of a position of strengths. That's what I'm always saying. So that people can actually dedicate themselves fully to a transition to become data informed and really make that work, because otherwise it just ends up in a complete disaster, because we are just trying to fix issues which data cannot fix, right? And that's more the structural issues that I mean. So it links to kind of becoming more resilient and becoming more aware of uncertainty, which is not a data problem. Data can improve or can provide insights in the end, or we can derive insights from data to improve the performance of projects, but it's not fixing fundamental issues, right? But another thing is to become aware of where data is actually coming from in projects. So when we become data informed in project management, what data are we talking about? What project data is it actually, right? So it can be any contextual data which links to the context of whatever the project is working on, right? But mainly it's also about project management data, so project schedules, risk registers, and stakeholder maps, and all these kind of things, right? And who's producing that data? Who is that? The project teams, right? Or the project manager. They are actually producing this, right? So people need to see actually the value in that data. And unfortunately, many don't see that value or don't treat the data like it has value, because once the project is over, usually data is thrown away, right? And we move on to the next project. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I have to be aware of how truthful, how transparent that data actually is. Is that actually the case, right? So let's say, the first stage is obviously to share data and maintain data, but then also do people want to do that because they're afraid that some projects are failing and we need data from failure. There's no point in just providing all the data of all the successful projects. We need to run through project failures to learn from failure, but nobody really wants to or would like to do that. I always compare that to my son, who is 11 years old in school, and then when he comes back from school with a school exam which is not really looking good, then he tries to avoid this. He cannot really avoid it. Because I have to sign something, but he tries to hide things. He doesn't want to talk about it. Let's put it this way. So he hides as much as possible and gives me some funny explanations why this all happened and this kind of stuff, right? So in projects, it's just natural, right? If we have a failure, if a project failure is going on, or you just ran a project against the wall, right? Then nobody wants to talk about it because it looks bad on our track record from the project managers. And just get over it, right? And if you have to justify something or explain something, you don't want to. Nobody goes really in front and says, "I completely messed up," right? Or "I did all these things wrong," right? And that's where people get stuck because they're not learning. They're just hiding things, right? It happens a lot, and many, including myself, when I was working for years in project management, of course, there was not 100% transparency because of political things and also how failure is being perceived, right? So failure should not be a taboo anymore. Failure means learning. And in most cases, failure is not even a people problem. It's actually rather a process problem. So, but whenever a project fails, then me as a project manager, then I feel responsible and I feel accountable for this, of course. But I feel then also like it's some personal failure, which in most of the times is nonsense, right? Because it's more like a process problem. So we should actually depersonalize projects and focus rather on processes. But coming back to your question, how to get started actually is really to find the purpose or define the purpose, really understand what to do or where one wants to go, and then really make a deep scan or some initial assessment of how the project environment looks like. How are we dealing with project data? Do we even, how diligent are we, right? And then also how transparent, how truthful an organization is. Because if there's no transparency, if there's no truth in data, or you just get half the truth, then you can become data informed as much as you want, but data will not tell you more than you probably would know already. And that's, imagine this like Amazon, or if you go buying on Amazon. And what does Amazon do, right? They know your history of what you bought. And based on this, they work out recommendations and this sort of thing. But they also know where you're navigating to, right? What books or any other product, what you're looking at, right? Maybe you're not buying it, but you're looking at stuff, right? And then that influences obviously also their recommendations, right? So imagine one part of these insights that they're getting are just gone. They would not get it. All what they have is really your buying history. Then they would be limited in their recommendations, obviously. And that's the same thing, right? But it's probably even worse if the data is not really truthful, or there's some subtle lies in there, right? Then the data needs to be, from a quality point of view, needs to be appropriate. And that starts with the people to actually have that mindset and in terms of transparency and truthfulness.
Indeed. So I like that. So to get started, really, we need to know where we're going, and then what's the purpose of becoming data informed. I think when you were talking through that, I think one thing that came to mind, and you can elaborate if it's correct, is how you use a sat nav. So there's a sat nav I've got in the car, and typically you put on a sat nav for part of the journey. Even if you don't know where you're going, you know part of where you're going. You know maybe the initial first few miles, and then at some point you need the actual directions. And for certain routes, I find myself ignoring the navigation system. Say, hold on, I know this route. I know you're telling me to go left. That doesn't make sense right now. I'm going to go right. It's not that I'm being driven by the sat nav, but I'm being informed by it, and I know when I need to rely on it. So it would be good to me. I don't know if you can use that as an example to tease out being data informed, because there's a lot of data in the sat nav, but there's still the human driving the car, not the navigation system.
Yeah, that's a very good example or analogy, because the navigation system in the car, that is basically what represents the concept of being data informed, right? Because especially if you remember the old navigation systems, right? These clunky things there, right? Which directed you wherever, but where you don't want to go. I mean, obviously things changed significantly, and they're much more advanced nowadays. And so what does the navigation system do, right? It takes data from all kinds of sources, like maps or Google Maps, and I don't know, any warnings in terms of traffic, et cetera, right? And so you want to go from A to B, and then it calculates you the best route based on all these different factors, right? And it gives you then the option: do you want to take the fastest route? You want to take the easiest route, right? Or any of these, right? Or the recommended route, whatever the system is being set up to recommend, right? And obviously, as a driver, I would take the decision, right? What I want to do, right? And then also, the system may tells you, please go that route, right? Because that's the easiest or the fastest or anything, right? But maybe I don't want to do that, right? Maybe that's some funny neighborhood there, right? Which I've seen before, and it's at night. No, I don't want to go there. I know what's going on there, so maybe not, right? So the point is, and that comes back to the definition of data informed versus data driven, right? Data informed is where there's a combination of data or the insights that get derived from data. So that navigation system basically provides some knowledge or some insights now based on all our driving history here and all these other data sources. I would recommend going this route, right? But that's data or data analytics, let's say, right, and technology in general. There's also limitation, right? It's just based on quantifiable information or data, right? But there's missing the piece of intuition, of experience, human experience, and gut feeling that even plays a role as well. And gut feeling is kind of linked to intuition, right? And experience drives intuition. So this intuition, where I would say, I don't want to go through this neighborhood, that's based on my experience, but it's a human element, right? Which maybe even free of any logic, right? Because it's just the human element that needs to play in. So in the end, you need to have a combination between the insights that you get from data and on the one side, and the other side are the insights that you get from the human experience and intuition, and that actually builds the knowledge, right? Also for project management in the end, right? When we say knowledge so far was based mainly on human experience, the skills, obviously, the intuition, and some information that we collect based on that knowledge that we have, right? Or that human knowledge that we have. So right now, when we say data informed, we actually add some other ingredient to this, which is data analytics, right? Not only data, we bring in data analytics, which means basically to look at patterns, right? Across different data sets and find some commonalities or some other sort of insights that could help us with our decision making. So that adds then to knowledge, and who needs to mix that up, right? The people again, right? So and that's where the behaviors come in, right? Where we have to, and it links to what I said before in terms of transparency and truthfulness, etc., right? Because if data comes in and adds to the knowledge, it should be kind of, you can call it like clean data, right? And not some messed up data. And I'm not saying like messed up data in terms of the quality, how that looks like in a database or something. I'm saying more like in terms of its truthfulness, right? Is that even true data? Is that all correct, right? In projects, a lot of times, project managers, they go into steering committees and claim their project has the status of, from red, amber, green. Say like, yeah, project is amber, while the project is actually red, maybe, right? But they want to avoid, all this scrutiny and they say, we have a handle here. I mean, we make that, we have that under control. But if we report red, oh my God, then I have to have a meeting with this project sponsor and those stakeholders, and everybody will panic and everything gets in a direction that nobody wants, while also it maybe puts some bad light on the project manager, right? Just by having a project that is red. So these are these kind of things where things are a little bit more transparent, which is also linked to the concept of shadow working. So shadow working is kind of where people in projects and other areas obviously as well, but in projects, where we operate in a way which you will not find anywhere. Nobody wants to talk about it, and nobody wants to document it anywhere. So for example, and I mean, I can talk about myself, right? I mean, I had a project, and I messed something up. I missed actually to trigger some activity, and that would impact or would have impacted a certain milestone, right? A project milestone. So what did I do? Well, I called up my buddy from the other department who has some connections there, right? And he did me a favor in the end, right, to help me out with this, right? Which maybe even at the end, in some cases, probably happens as well, where it's maybe not even really according to the rules or policies in an organization, right? That happens also often, right? Or, there are favors, or you have some workarounds in place, or apply those, which may be also not really according to what, I mean, the typical rules. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to put this into project plans. And then nobody wants to share their project plans, because if someone actually looks at this in detail, may see or has some questions at least. Oh, this looks strange. How did that work, right? That's why also in project management, whenever there's an audit somewhere, people not really happy with this, right? And it's less about the effort they need to do actually to provide all kinds of information to auditors. It's more about there might be some funny thing and that people don't want auditors to see, right? So, I mean, there are different scenarios, right? But I mean, in the end, coming back to your point, it is a combination of data, the insights from data on one side and the intuition and the intellect from people, right? That's important in terms of being data informed. And that's the difference to data driven. Because data driven for me has some, it feels like, data drives everything and it automates everything. And that's probably where something came from, which initially, or at least some time ago, and I heard that a lot, where people thought like, data analytics and eventually AI will replace project managers. No, that's not going to happen because at least today we can say that technology is not that far that it can replace our human experience in projects at least. And I don't even think that this is coming in the foreseeable future.
Interesting. No, thanks. So I like that description there, where it's the combination of the human experience, human intellect, human intuition, combined with data, gets us to be data informed. I don't know if we could try and tease this out with a few examples that people can relate to. So there's this concept within organizations that don't really rely on data. They have this effect which we call the hippo effect. You probably heard of the hippo, where the highest paid person's opinion drives decision making. You've got a project, you've got an initiative, and the decision making is not dependent on data, but rather it's opinions, but not just opinions. It's the opinions of one or two people just because they earn more. If we look at organizations who've avoided that, who've been able to disrupt their industries by becoming data informed, a couple that come to mind, and you might have more examples, are the likes of Amazon. You've already mentioned Amazon. If you think of Netflix, Facebook's another example potentially. These are companies that we can think of. They've come in, they've basically used data to disrupt the status quo. What lessons can we actually learn from these examples that most of us already know?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, of course, there are many lessons that can be learned from such organizations, but I would be cautious there. People are always way too quick to compare them or their organizations to such players like Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, Google, and so forth, right? It's kind of the shiny object syndrome, because I mean they're highly successful, obviously, but there's a difference. Those firms were born basically into a data economy. They were born with a focus on data and information. They're driven by data. I mean, without data, at least some of them, they wouldn't even exist, right? So it's all about data. While other firms, they are more traditional, that come from a different background. And for example, I worked a long time in financial services and very large global banks with a long way of tradition, right? And where a tradition plays a significant role, right? And then, of course, these organizations and others obviously as well, they need to find a way to adopt more modern practices, but they cannot turn everything just upside down and become right now the next Google or Amazon, because there's a culture that was built for many years, right? And as I said, like in Netflix, Google, and all, there was a culture established which is based on data in the beginning, right? But nevertheless, a lot of lessons can be taken from there, and I think many organizations, and you mentioned the hippo effect, right? I mean, you can basically learn some bits and pieces here and there and apply that, right? And I see in some organizations, actually, I've seen that also in organizations that I worked with, where it was all based on ranks. You basically were whoever you were talking to, on online, right? You were basically clear what rank that person has, right? And that causes in many ways that some people are not really open to speak, right? To speak about certain things, right? Because they're afraid, oh, this one is a managing director, so on and so forth, right? And so I need to tailor my speech here. I need to tailor my stuff so it sanitizes in a way, right? So it's the same thing that I said before, in terms of steering committees, right? Where the information passes through some filtering, and then there's some sanitation going on, right? Or information gets sanitized and filtered, so that something else comes out. Also, people not speaking up and hiding kind of even things, right? So there are organizations who actually remove this. And I've seen this just recently, where people are not able to see anymore the ranks or the position of the person they're talking to, or at least it will be very difficult to find out immediately, right? So previously, you basically, and I've seen it, right? If you're working there and you're on your messaging system there and within the organization, and then somebody calls you and you see, oh, managing director so and so forth is calling you, right? Or director so and so, right? You would not see that anymore. Then obviously it gives a different. It frees up a little bit, right? It's one approach or one measure, right, to be taken, which I find really suitable. So I agree that there needs to be some way of having that more flattened instead of this hierarchy, right? And that's exactly also the problem with when becoming data informed. And actually, there are more issues actually to this, and not only this one, because you have different players, especially in decision making. You have the one that you mentioned already, which is probably more linked to the old-fashioned decision makers who are basing everything on experience and intuition. And when they work for a long time in organizations, they're like, I have 30 years of experience, right? You come up here with your data and tell me I'm wrong. No, right? So it's they reject data right away, right? Which is obviously a challenge when you want to deploy data-informed practices. But on the other side, you have the complete opposite, which is also wrong. Where you have people, which is usually the younger generation, come up, we have data analytics, etc. Right? Data says this, right? So whatever you're saying, data is proving you wrong, right? The data says this and that, right? And that's very dangerous. It's a wrong approach, right? So both the old-fashioned person and the more data, how you can call it? Data activist, if you want to call it, right?
Data activists.
These are dangerous concepts, right? And those need to be balanced out. So you find some balanced approach which works with data plus experience, both, right? Just as mentioned before, we need to have this hybrid. Because data is not always saying the truth. And it's very dangerous to say, if you go to a meeting and somebody says, but the data says, then this should tick off all kinds of alarm bells, right? That should not happen, right? Because data is not saying anything. no data has no voice, right? I mean, it's the people who actually make sense out of data. So you can bake your data in all kinds of shapes together, right? Just to provide a different or a certain message which might be wrong, right? It's what people make out of it, right? And so that's why, especially for that reason, you need to find the right balance, and you should not actually dump experience or reject data on the other hand. So you need to find the right balance, and that has to do with the culture, and that's why data-informed approaches, or to introduce them, usually starts or must start basically with culture.
Okay, I like that. So we really need to focus on the culture to get those data-informed practices in place. If we look at, and you used it on projects, since that's your space a lot, we all projects, even beyond projects, we all work in a very complex world today. We just need to look at things around geopolitics, the energy, what's happening with the energy sector, with energy markets, sustainability. There is a ton of complexity. And it's in this complexity, a lot of change is in this context that projects are trying to be run. So this is the context, this is the arena in which we're trying to make change. It's an arena of complexity. And this is where we're also trying to ensure we have data-informed practices. In the context of complexity, are there any specific advice you can give to change practitioners and decision makers, leaders, on how to address complexity efficiently and effectively?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, at least I'm a big advocate of the adaptive leadership in combination with an informed leadership. Actually, I think those two elements, they need to go along, especially in this age of information overflow, right? So adaptive on one side is basically to build resilience, and I believe I have mentioned that a little bit earlier, where people need to become more aware of projects and the whole context, and have a broader view on where this project is heading to, and become more adaptive and less reactive, because many project teams are more reactive. And I mean, COVID-19 is the best example, right? I mean, if we look at this, when this broke out, then many organizations just got hit by surprise and didn't know what's going on, right? And they were struggling, and many projects got terminated because of that. But I mean, if you look at this from an organizational point of view, there were a lot of organizations who struggled, while others, they had to send, obviously, the whole workforce to home, to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to rearrange their processes, etc., and make sure that they can operate this way. And so some organizations actually succeeded in doing this more or less easily, right? Because they were prepared, and they have this adaptive capacity, kind of, right? Where something hits, you're not just going back to a normal state, which anyway is not happening, but rather adjust based on a new reality, right? So that's this adaptive capacity and adaptive leadership, which I think, especially in these days where everything becomes more complex, more uncertain, it's very important. But that, I think, needs to go hand in hand with this, in what I call the informed leadership. So because you can become adaptive, or you have that capability to be adaptive to anything new, but you don't want to be reactive, right? You want to foresee things. You want to prepare to see what's coming, and that's where you need information, where you need data, and you can work this out in the combinations. There are a lot of techniques and practices, foresight techniques, to work this out and become more prepared, right? And to remove kind of this blurriness, right, of the future. And it will not, I mean, nothing will get better here in terms of this blurriness, right? It will actually get worse, right? So it will be come to a state where people, if they don't change anything, they will be completely lost and just, in terms of projects, usually we work against timelines, right? So there's a deadline so-and-so, a target date. They would be completely clueless, right? And would just run any number, right? But to avoid this, one needs to become more adaptive and more informed to actually foresee certain things. So in other words, one needs to become more resilient to this kind of impact that happen from disruption and these more unplanned events, which happen obviously more often. The problem is that many organizations, they don't really see this and rather think like, oh, projects are failing, so let's send all the project managers to more advanced project management training and put some agile practices on top to become more flexible. That should help, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's all good stuff, but it's just not sufficient, I think, right? There needs to be a different way of operating, which links kind of also to what I said before in terms of how failure is treated, right? It needs to be a learning culture, needs to be put in place. A questioning culture needs to be put in place where people can actually speak up and actually challenge people, right? And speak up, right? Troublemakers, right? In many projects that I had some sort of troublemakers, as people said, yeah, no, we have to get rid of this person, right? No, you cannot, because you find the right balance. You need those people, right? Who are more like, you have on one side, you have the more optimistic people, right? Who are all, with this optimistic mindset. And then you have these people who are like, oh, nothing will work out here, right? This is all a big mess, right? And they're all pessimistic, right? And troublemakers in the end. So you need those people, because what I usually, or what I do actually also as part of my business activities, so I do a lot of trainings with project teams and workshops. I do, for example, pre-mortem workshops or failure workshops, I call them, right? So what is that exactly? So pre-mortem is actually something that was invented by a professor called Gary Klein, I think about 10 years ago or so. So, I mean, we're all familiar with the post-mortem, when the project fails, and then you have to do a wash up and see what is the root cause. So a pre-mortem does the exact same thing, only you do that before the project, right? And you teletransport yourself into the future, and your project just failed. What happened there, right? And then you work that out. And I combine that with some approach, which I call then the failure workshop, where, when you plan out the project, usually, I mean, you get all the effort estimates, you work out the activities, the tasks and the phases, etc., to come up with a proper date, wherever something is maybe not really clear, or you have some dependencies, you may work out some buffer, some contingency here. At the end, you want to obviously have your product succeed, right? And deliver that. So if you turn this whole thing around and say you want your project to fail, what would you do, right? You got your mandate, please deliver this project. Okay, I will right now do everything in my capacity to make that fail, right? So what would you do? Just you sabotage your own project. What would you do, right? Put that in a plan. So you put out your plan for failure, right? And what does it do? It basically gives you, it's interesting what I usually see then, what kind of things come up then. You see a lot of things that you wouldn't have seen before. But But in general, and that's the whole idea behind this, it sharpens your senses in terms of what potentially can happen, what kind of scenarios can happen. So you're not predicting anything, you're not predicting the future, but you are working out certain scenarios. And that can go from worst case to best case, and you just mix it all together. And then you have certain futures that you worked out and put together. And that sharpens your senses in terms of being prepared for complexity, for turbulence, for disruption, and these kind of things. And that is something that I do a lot. And so, yeah, coming back to your question, what can people do? I mean, it is really to find ways to deal with uncertainty and complexity. Don't fight it, right? It's actually a good thing, right? Because you have to think about complexity and uncertainty. What does it mean? It means things are progressing, right? Technology is advancing mainly, right? It's technology mostly, and anything is evolving. So evolution goes along with complexity, right? And things become faster, becomes more uncertain, which is good. If that wouldn't happen, then everything would be a standstill, and we wouldn't progress. So it's rather to see it as a good thing, and one needs to embrace it. So just work with it, right? And these kind of workshops that I'm doing, you also find that out once you see actually some failure points or potential failure points, you start seeing also opportunities. Indeed. So and then it works out also in a way that where in some cases you even can question your entire project and that direction. Maybe that project shouldn't be taken on. Maybe we should even go a different direction. Maybe the whole scope should be changed, right? And you find out once you actually run this whole thing through, not only in this optimistic way, but also in a way where you look at failure.
Indeed. I like that explanation of complexity. A lot of times people hear the term complexity and they get frightened. They're trying to avoid it. I think I like what you're saying there. You need to embrace complexity. Within a system, a complex system is actually more resilient. So you need to embrace it, realize the system is becoming more resilient. It's a question of finding our place and being adaptive and informed. I think that's that. And combining both, not one or the other, is a combination of those two mindsets effectively that allows us to thrive in the midst of complexity. I think this is a brilliant foundation for leading data-informed change. It's something that's badly needed in the project management space. And beyond project management, I think leaders, decision makers, and I think you mentioned it as well, that data-informed culture is responsibility for everyone. So this is key. And you've clearly got a lot of insights here. Just for time, because we are running out of time, it would be good to, in closing, know a little bit more about you. I know you've touched on a little bit about your workshops. Is there anything you're doing right now? How can people reach you? It would be good to share any final thoughts from you.
I mean, I think you realize, I mean, I'm really passionate about project management and innovation. I think that comes from, I mean, I worked almost 30 years, which makes me very old, almost 30 years in technology projects. And I think I've seen a lot from huge successes to massive failures. And that where I started a lot of questioning things, right? And that basically led me to open my own business or my own practice, where I provide trainings to project leaders and teams and organizations to actually help them to make that transition to a more evidence-based project management practice, because I think that that's what needs to get done, especially when you look at projects, especially technology projects. That's where I come from. There is no change in project success rates. It's always around the 30% mark. That's, I think, the best we can get to. And that's for the last 20, 30 years like this, right? So I started questioning what needs to get done, right? What can we do, right? And we have right now these possibilities with data and advanced technology. You obviously see that a lot in terms of, what kind of technologies you read all about, data analytics, machine learning, and all this kind of things, which is fantastic stuff, right? But the aspect of culture is usually being overlooked a little bit, right? And not without reason. A lot of digital transformations are actually failing. I heard a number of 70%. Because of culture. That's actually the number one reason that was given. So I work a lot with organizations to actually make that switch or that change to become more evidence-driven in projects. Do workshops, I do coaching. I can be reached, I think the easiest way is on LinkedIn. I don't think that anybody else with my name is there. Should be easy to find. And otherwise I have my own website where so markusglowasz.com, where you would find more information about what I'm doing, what I'm offering, etc. And I would be happy to connect with anyone who would be interested to hear more, discuss more about these topics around data-informed project management, and potentially even to work together to help out with such journey.
Perfect. Thanks, Markus. What I'll do is, for the purpose of the podcast, I'll make sure that your LinkedIn profile is in the description. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you see in the description section. If it's on the podcast, just go into the description, sometimes referred to as the show notes. You can reach out and contact Markus as well. Markus, this has been very insightful. I've learned a lot, and I think it's good to see that balance between being data informed, understanding the data, and also the culture. It's a combination of both, and I think there's a lot to learn and a lot that we can benefit from the insights you shared today. So thanks so much for this, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Would you like to learn more about leading data-informed change? Would you like to join in the conversation about using data to transform decision-making? Connect with a community of like-minded leaders on our website, thechangelead.com. When you visit our site, click Join to join the community. Check out the show notes for details on how you can contact today's guest, Markus. Also, please don't forget, like, comment, review, and subscribe. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great week, and see you next time.